Hey guys, my name is David Green and welcome back to episode 17 of Supernatural Archives. And today we'll be revisiting one of my first stories in this series, the Russian sleep experiment. Please feel free to sit back, relax, cut the lights, and lock the doors, cause it's story time. Our story takes place 10 years after the events of the experiment took place, bringing us to 1957, the facility where the horrors of the sleep experiment occurred, now long since abandoned, or so we think. Four individuals, Nikolai, Alexander, Dmitry, and Boris, decided to investigate the facility before its demolition next year. Everyone's talked about how the facility was home to a terrible monster, but no one that enters has ever left. So the four decided to test the legends and make their way into the facility. Nikolai, having been raised by his military parents, had brought the necessary equipment for the excursion, including water, food bars, a few pocket knives, and, if things went south, his father's pistol. Dmitry, being the biggest and strongest of the group, was leading the path and moved some heavy blocks of stone out of the way so everyone could enter the facility. Little did they know that they had just entered a labyrinth of stone. Once inside the facility, they were met with what seemed like a slaughter. Bodies of the old scientists and guards littered the hallways, rotting away and succumbing to decay. The foul stench that had been trapped inside the facility hit the boys as if death itself had brushed past their noses. Boris couldn't stand it and retched in a corner. The others managed to hold it down, regain their composure, and began exploring. Nikolai was able to find a breaker box and saw that the switches had been turned off. He struggled to flip them on, but managed to flick on a few. The facility moaned, creaking back to life as just a few lights sputtered, and the group was able to put their flashlights away for a moment. Boris was freaked slightly by the noises the facility made, but Dmitry assured him that the facility had long since been abandoned. The boys walked deeper into the facility and started to notice strange marks on the walls. Were those claw marks? They eventually found their way into what looked like a lab. Vials and lab equipment laid everywhere, battered and broken, except for one canister that seemed to have been untouched for ages. Nikolai approached the canister and went to inspect it. The rest of the boys followed close behind. He noticed a small latch on the top of it and released it, causing the canister to somewhat burst open, spraying everyone in the face with what seemed to be pressurized air. After gathering themselves from the strange occurrence, they noticed something odd. They were suddenly more energized than they were prior to entering the facility. Dmitry suddenly remembered that he read something about an experimental gas that helped with sleep deprivation and would help soldiers stay awake. The boys thought this was amazing, as now they didn't need to rest their eyes as they continued to explore the facility without feeling an ounce of tiredness. When they continued to explore the facility, every now and then, Dmitry would feel as though they were being watched. What seemed like days went by as they continued to traverse the facility. Whenever they thought they were reaching the end of the road, there would be some hidden passage and the journey would continue. Throughout their exploration, they would find more canisters and would take them to keep them well rested. However, as days passed, Dmitry started seeing Nikolai acting bizarre. He would constantly ask if anyone had found more of the gas and would scramble to make sure that he would get the first spray. Eventually, by the time the group had reached the end of the facility, Dmitry had stopped taking the gas altogether as he saw what was happening to Nikolai and the others as they followed close behind. The rest of the boys became more animalistic, not wanting to go to sleep, and sometimes even fighting each other for the next canister. As they realized they had explored every corner of the facility, they had come to the realization that they didn't remember which way was the exit. While the group tried to retrace their steps, Dmitry managed to resist the urge that the others gave into. He stopped inhaling the gas days ago, noticing the growing addiction and the monstrous change in his companions. His strength of will had kept him sane, but it was quickly becoming clear that sanity might not be enough to survive in the labyrinth. They had lost track of time. Days, weeks, it didn't matter anymore. The canisters were nearly gone, and with them, the last vestiges of reason among his friends. Fights had broken out, vicious and primal, over the remaining doses of the gas. Dmitry's heart pounded as he realized the full horror of the situation. His friends, no, his former friends, had become something else. Nikolai's eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling with a wild hunger every time they approached the last few canisters. Boris, once the timid one, now snarled like a caged animal, eyes darting in paranoia. Alexander, usually calm and collected, had completely lost the ability to speak, communicating only through guttural sounds and erratic gestures. The gas had consumed them, turning them into feral creatures more akin to beasts than men, and he was now stuck with these creatures deep in the facility. Dmitri watched from a distance as Nikolai and Boris tore into each other, hands clawing at flesh, eyes wild with rage. He knew he had to escape before he became the next target. In the chaos of another brawl over a canister, Dmitri saw his chance. He slipped away, using the shadows to mask his retreat, moving as quietly as possible throughout the twisted halls of the facility. The howls and snarls echoed behind him, but they grew fainter as he distanced himself from the group. He had memorized enough of the path to find the general direction of the exit. If he could just reach the surface, he might have a chance. His heart raced as he neared the entrance, his legs screaming in protest from exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he found the heavy stone blocks they had moved to enter the facility. Dmitri pushed with all his strength, his muscles burning, but the thought of his friends catching up to him drove him forward. With a final heave, the stone shifted, and Dmitri squeezed through the narrow gap. The cold night air hit his face like a wave of salvation. He gasped, filling his lungs with the sweet relief of freedom, and ran until the facility was a distant, terrifying memory. Weeks passed. Dmitri returned to his home, but his story was met with skepticism and disbelief. He tried to warn others to tell them about the gas, about what happened to Nikolai, Boris, and Alexander, but no one believed him. They dismissed his tale as the ravings of a man who had spent too much time in isolation. And so Dmitri lived with the knowledge of the nightmare beneath the earth. Friends he had lost, not to death, but to madness. The facility was eventually demolished, but the darkness it contained, the gas that turned men into monsters, would haunt him forever. He was the sole survivor, but in a way he had lost his mind too, left with the memories of the feral beings his friends had become, the echoes of their snarls following him in every waking moment. And that's it for today. Hopefully I was able to create an interesting sequel to my first ever story, considering that this was more of a one-off that the Creepypasta fandom had ever made. Stay tuned for the next episode, and I will see you guys next time.